The recent financial crisis has exposed many weaknesses in the global banking system, including the lack of liquidity provisions. New liquidity provisions, as set out in Basel III, will be implemented in Europe through a revision of the Capital Requirements Directive. However, there is still much debate over the design of the new liquidity standards. Leading policymakers and industry experts talk to GFS News about where they stand in the liquidity debate.
So, another revision of the Capital Requirements Directive. Well, I think we do have to have one because there's been a lot of work in the international scene with the Basel Committee, and following on from the financial crisis, having a look at where capital broke down, in particular in the area of liquidity and quality. So I think we do have to carry those things through.
The crisis was not a capital crisis per se. It was much more a liquidity crisis, a crisis of lost trust, where we have to ensure to build up this trust into the financial markets again. One of the key issues within this process is to ensure a high level of liquidity for all banks, within the example of Lehman in mind.
We have some concern on the overall impact of the lending capacity of the banks because of Basel III and these requirements on capital, but also on liquidity. Banks are indeed major investors in sovereign debt. Now, if other financial assets are less recognized as liquid assets, there is this risk of a too high concentration of sovereign debt within the banks. As a matter of principle, banks want to have a diversity of issuers and instruments with regard to their liquidity management. And yes, indeed, we think that this should be taken into account by the policymakers.
I'm not sure we've got enough sovereign debt in the world to go round, because we're also looking at using sovereign debt as high quality capital in other prudential fields and for investments of all kinds. And so that seems to me a little bit strange. If everybody wants it and there isn't enough, I guess it makes sure it's liquid because there's a demand. But it's all very much eggs in one basket, which worries me.
Requiring commercial banks to hold liquidity buffers is clearly a good idea, but there is room for improvement in their design. A simple transposition of the Basel III recommendations into CRD IV risks leaving the European commercial banking system over-reliant on government debt as a source of liquidity in the event of a crisis. As we saw during the last financial crisis, even sovereign debt can abruptly turn illiquid.
The liquidity ratios are an interesting topic. I mean, some people think that they don't want them at all. I think it probably does have a good basis to look at liquidity because that's what went wrong in the financial crisis. Whether or not the ratios that have been chosen are ones that work, or whether you should define them in some other way, is something that I think needs us to look at.
I don't agree with the danger of concentration into certain asset classes due to the definition. We have to ensure partial flexibility and should encourage diversification. Excessive concentration into one particular asset class, including government debt, has to be discouraged.
I'm actually more concerned about what's in the capital that they're saying is highly liquid. I think that there are also big problems there.
We would like to have adjustments. First of all, gold and other precious metals are not considered as being liquid assets, which is not related to the reality, because they are used for that as well, so they should be recognized in the calculation of the liquidity ratios. We think also that liquidity of equities in general could be better recognized, And also even the bonds of financial institutions, they are less recognized than the bonds of other corporates of the same quality, which is a strange thing.
Characteristics the assets are supposed to have in order to be still liquid in case of crisis is still under discussion. In general, it is crucial to weaken the dependence on external ratings and to ensure appropriate alternative criteria to define liquid assets.
Well, generally speaking, we think that the haircuts are not recognizing the liquidity, the real liquidity of the instruments. For instance, on covered bonds which are very important in Europe and a very safe instrument, very liquid instrument. The best proof is that the US are looking to introduce it now. So the haircuts applied on these covered bonds are really not fair.
Perhaps we'll hit upon ideas as we go through actually looking at the derivatives proposals and the capital that we bring in for central counterparties. We're going to have to almost grasp that nettle first in that, and maybe that will have some knock-on effect into our thinking for CRD4.